welcome back to another astounding episode of the Arcane Archive presents MetaTalks. Today's MetaTalk topic, Sammy, would you like to let the people know what we're MetaTalk talking about?
Yeah, we're doing a God talk.
We're doing a
God.
God talk. We're gonna have like a little divine discussion.
Yeah, I didn't bring my priest collar today.
No. I had to take him through. I had to give him the good book. I had to throw the good book at him a little bit here.
This book happens to be widely disputed as a causer of a panic in the 90s. But yeah, we're talking about D&D deities.
That's right.
I'm kind of across the board. For those of you who have stuck to 5th edition, which is what a lot of us like, kind of most of what we've talked about.
Yeah.
There are editions before that bring in a lot of information. A lot of gods.
Yeah, no. There are like the topics and discussion on gods is vast, sorted, ever changing. It is it's hard to really get any kind of like discerning kind of like definite information on what's going on with the gods and stuff, because by their very nature a lot of them are supposed to be unknowable in certain ways and what they're doing and their machinations and the experiences they have, but we're gonna essentially, this episode though is going to focus, I think, more so on, again, like, we're gonna introduce some of the gods to you, probably, again, any gods if you guys are going to be playing, let's say, Baldur's Gate 3, or if you are going to have your campaign set in like the pre-established world of like the Forgotten Realms, primarily, as what we'll focus on here. But it also is specifically more so about, because I was talking a little bit about Sammy again earlier, about like, in my experience, in my campaigns that I've played in, I feel like there's not a lot of true representation of gods a lot of the time, even though in the world of D&D, gods are known, and not just known, they are active. Yes. They're not super passive. I mean, some of them might be more than others for sure, but a lot of them are very much active, whether they be good gods or evil dark gods, right? They are active, they are present, and they interact with the world. They're clerics, and in other ways too. And I sometimes feel like a lot of the time people don't utilize that resource or that aspect as much as they could to really cool effect. Or Sam kind of pointed out, it's either they're almost like non-existent, at least in terms of the campaign, even though, like, again, your characters are like chosen ones who are battling some kind of big thing, most likely at some point, or they're like too much of the focal point and maybe are like overused to excess.
Nothing can happen without a god being present.
Or something like that. And so we wanted to maybe go over a little bit on how ways you could implement your divine buddies and our divine pals from up above in a efficient and not an overshadowing way, in terms of like, hey, you don't necessarily want gods to just be able to be like, oh, you have a problem? Yeah, I'm gonna, as a god, I'll come in and I'll just handle it willy-nilly. But you also want them to be present, such as giving visions to maybe some of your characters, especially if they're more inclined to be connected to said gods, such as like with a cleric or a paladin or even a warlock, depending, even warlock patrons. We're not even going to talk about just gods. We're also going to talk about all the different types of beings that would basically be considered maybe like ascended or higher level beings, like archfey, archfiends, some other
beings, things like that.
Eldritch beings,
I think
demigods, quasi deities.
There is something I do want to preface. I think for people who maybe don't play a lot of faith-based classes, whether they're not picking up cleric or paladin, they stay away from warlock, say they like fighter. That's their thing. They like fighter and barbarian. I think that there is something to be said that while you may not build a character with a faith in mind, your character might not be someone who thinks about deities of different planes and all the things going on in the universe that is D&D. It doesn't mean that they aren't noticed. I think especially when you get into high level play, or when your party becomes renowned, even at like 7th, 8th level, when you are big players. The group of you together can do things that even a small standing army cannot. I think it's something to be said that you may not hold reverence towards gods as a character, but because of the society that Dungeons and Dragons kind of pushes forward, there is a case to be made that you will have something take notice of you, whether that's an established, well-known deity with plenty of temples around, or something on a much smaller scale. And I think as a player, you do have to kind of leave yourself a little bit open for things to notice you outside of your periphery. It's something that I've did not start with when I played. I had a character that had a divine being. I didn't really think anything of it until, you know, later on in levels when he was killed and brought back and got to meet his deity. It was one of those things where I didn't think anything of it the entire 2 years I played before that moment. And I did praying sometimes. I had some fun with it. I was like, role play. This is cool. And then it clicked for me where it's like, no, if you tell a story, that there are going to be things in the background that happen, and it doesn't necessarily have to be someone you revere or pray to or think about all the time. But I think these beings can be well used as something that can influence a
I
story.
mean, yeah,
You
absolutely.
know,
I would even say, like, again, like to your point, you don't have to be an incredibly pious, like, character or person, like, in the game. Like Sammy said, even because, again, these gods, they're not necessarily all just always about, like, oh, well, I only help those who, actively worship me. Like,
no.
gods, specifically in D&D, they are designed to they help those who, again, embody the beliefs and the concepts that they themselves embody and like to spread, right? So for instance, if you're like, let's say, a ranger, right, and you have access obviously to natural magic, and your thing is like, you like to preserve the natural order of things, the balance of nature, animals, fauna, flora, all that stuff, you're probably going to gain the attention of certain nature gods, who, again, you are just a symbol or example of their tenets, whether you actively worship them or not. They still view you as being a representation, and you are still, shall we say, not enforcing, but you are spreading and reinforcing their beliefs and their objectives and aims for the world just naturally. Yeah. And so you might find yourself potentially even just with some amount of divine protection or favor with them just by doing that, whether you're even aware of them or not, honestly, because you just embody and represent the things that they embody, represent, and care about. So you might have, like, for instance, Sylvanas would probably be a deity whose attention you might capture because, you care about wildlife, wild nature, plants, and you like to keep the civilization maybe from encroaching a bit too much over there. If you like, again, for instance, like you like agriculture, you like to help, farmers and other things and stuff like that grow. Chantia would be a goddess who you would get, whose favor and attention maybe you would gain, especially if you are a particularly prominent individual, right? And which you are as a player character. If you're playing in this world, you are just automatically kind of on the short list for gods to notice you because of your ability to affect and influence the world around you beyond what most anybody else can presently. Like, that in of itself is what makes, in my opinion, like, gods far more likely to be more active in interacting with you above kind of other people normally, right? Because not just anybody is going to necessarily interact with a god, even though they are active in the world, right?
It's one of those things, like, you could sit in there's a reason why you go out there and do these big things, and then there's a person in your local clergy that sits and prays and helps poor people, but they're not given a bunch of power, but they're given maybe just enough to make ends meet for people less fortunate than them. And that's kind of like, that when I talk to players or DMs who, like, don't really get how gods are supposed to work, I like to remind people of the way that the pantheon or the oath of the paladins work. Technically, you do not have to believe in any higher power to be a paladin.
You
It's
do
not
not
about
technically
that.
have to. It's not.
It is more about structuring your life in an oath with specific beliefs that happen to align with a higher power. One of the characters I've always wanted to play was a paladin who has an oath but has no idea who their god is.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't about that. It was
It's not.
about
It's about
setting a
believing
structure.
in this code. It's about
Yeah.
believing in these tenets.
And
I think we talked about this before, maybe even
yeah.
about like in the class episode about Paladin, where Paladin is unlike a cleric who does get their powers, their spells, we should say, kind of directly from a divine source and being. Paladins are different in that they almost manifest their power from their belief in themselves and these tenets and things above themselves. It's not even like the god, it's literally the concept of these tenets.
Now, odds are there is still a god that is sitting there giving them that power, whether or not they know it, or acknowledge it. That's all divine magics, all natural and divine magics. There is someone somewhere, something
who
pushing
are
power
supplying the
towards
energy. It's like a battery.
Even with druids, even with rangers, there is some form of magic being pushed through the weave towards them by a being. Whether or not they acknowledge or know it,
or the land, whatever it is,
there's someone there orchestrating that. Now, some people may not like that. They might want to kind of change that, tweak that. That's fine. But I think it's something that can give a lot of depth to, well, I just know how to do this. I'm a ranger. I know how to use Hunter's Mark. And it's like, well, that's true. Through intense training, through doing what you always do, yeah, you've learned how to do that.
You could even say it's like an instinctual, innate thing that you get.
But you didn't wake up one day and now you're magic.
No.
Something that you've done has given you that, and someone has acknowledged that fact. And that's why you're able to do what you do. And so I think for the way that a lot of people look at the pantheon and the different deities is maybe can be refined a little bit, or at least we can kind of discuss what we think is a good balanced way to use them. Because it is daunting, and it is kind of like, well, why does anything I do matter if these beings, these all-powerful beings, can sit there and change things like that? But that's kind of the point. That's the fun part, is that we're still doing it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
and here's the interesting part, right? And I think that right there is the biggest kind of mentality that I want to touch upon and maybe get to shift, right? Obviously, whenever somebody thinks of the word God, right, you immediately go to like, oh, well, they're all powerful, all knowing, all encompassing, they do whatever they want, right? That's not technically true. Even with gods in D&D, even they have rules and regulations and restrictions in what they're actively able to influence in certain ways, right? Because that's obviously what keeps them, like with players, for instance, with characters, that's also what keeps them from basically just changing or doing whatever they want, because also at that point, it would just start to get ridiculous, right? If every god could just do whatever they wanted, then nothing would even happen anyway. One god would just switch reality to be this, another guy would just switch it back or switch it to something else. And they themselves are under a very kind of strict and specific rules and regulations. That's exactly why they're not able to just actively, personally take action in a lot of things, because there are restrictions. And we're going to get into that a little bit too, just as a preface to kind of, again, broaden maybe your awareness for any GMs out there, again, of how your gods, your deity, your pantheon, at least, again, if you're working maybe in more established, like pre-established lore. Obviously, if you make a homebrew, you can decide whatever the heck you want about your pantheon and how gods interact with things and what they do. But if you're ever, playing in more of a pre-established setting with pre-established lore, pantheon, and rules, specifically like Forgotten Realms, we're going to focus on that. Here's kind of what you should know. All right. Gods have specifically a divine rank or hierarchical system. It is specifically called their divine ranking. And in that divine ranking, gods have, like, depending on where they're at, they could be considered certain levels of deity, and therefore their power is greater, lesser, equal, or whatever to other deities. And that also establishes what they are able to do to a certain extent as well, especially to like the material plane. Once you're a deity, you start to lose, whether you achieved that by starting out as a mortal and then being able to ascend to deity status, or if you were just created as a deity in and of itself. There's always that ranking system, and once you do that, you begin to have slightly less direct control and effect on the material plane itself, due to the vast amount of power that you have and due to the rules and nature of the omniverse. And so we'll just go ahead and go over a little bit of that ranking system at the moment. It's changed. One thing to be aware of, again, with all of these gods, the divine rankings, the rules have changed astronomically from edition to edition in D&D, for multiple reasons. But I think one thing that kind of remains the same, or at least maybe should always as a baseline, is the divine ranking system. So essentially, we can start at the top, and for 5th edition, you will specifically have a total, I believe, of let's say 4 ranks. You have greater deities, lesser deities, quasi deities, and then like demigods, which kind of falls under the same umbrella, I suppose, of like quasi deities. Essentially, greater deities are beyond mortal understanding. They can't be summoned, and they are almost always removed from direct involvement in mortal affairs. On very rare occasions, they manifest avatars similar to lesser deities, but slaying a greater god's avatar has no effect on the god itself. Like these guys are like the closest things to being, the great gods who just who don't really act indirectly a lot of the time because they have so much other things to be constantly thinking about or considering and working. Like greater deities are often deities who have like millions, if not maybe billions of worshippers on like multiple realities, on multiple worlds, right? And so their consciousness is extended to more than just one reality or one place. And so obviously they might not necessarily be as directly involved, as well as due to the power that they wield, they're also much more restricted in a lot of ways. Below them in 5th edition, technically in the old days, like in 3.5, it used to be intermediate deities, which were like, the middle of the road. For 5th edition, they technically have gotten rid of that now, and instead it just goes straight to lesser deities. I personally still think that there are intermediate deities. Like I think like that also just makes sense. But regardless, for 5th edition, it specifically goes from greater deities all the way down to lesser right away. And lesser deities are embodied somewhere in the planes. Some lesser deities live in the material plane, as does the unicorn goddess Laru of the Forgotten Realms and the titanic shark god Sekala, revered by the Sahuagin. Others live in the outer planes, as Lolth does in the abyss. And such deities can be encountered by mortals in a more consistent, direct manner. Because they, lesser deities usually, they do have their own kind of like planes, but they haven't transcended kind of above that and created almost their own entire plane or existence. Below that would be considered the quasi/demigod deities. And they specifically have like those types of creatures or beings have a divine origin. But they cannot hear prayers or hear or answer prayers. They can't grant spells to clerics or control aspects of mortal life in a more like overarching manner. They are still immensely powerful beings, and in theory, they could ascend to godhood if they amassed enough worshippers that could supply them with like divine energy or essence. Quasi-deities fall in 5th edition specifically into 3 subcategories known as demigods, titans, and vestiges. Demigods are born from the union of a deity and a mortal being, and they have some divine attributes, but their mortal parentage makes them the weakest of the quasi-deities. Titans are the divine creations of deities. They might be birthed from the union of 2 deities, manufactured on a divine forge, or born from the blood spilled by a god, or otherwise brought about through divine will or substance of some manner. Vestiges are deities who have lost nearly all their worshippers and are considered dead from a mortal perspective. but specific esoteric rituals and like, obscure, ancient rites can sometimes contact these beings and draw on their latent power and potentially even reinvigorate or revive them, maybe, just depending on, what is kind of done. So that in essence is the much more simplified, streamlined version of like the divine ranking system for 5th edition. But in actuality, it's much more kind of complicated than that. Because one thing you should be aware of for deities, as I was kind of telling Sam earlier, is some of you might wonder, like, why don't certain deities who are maybe like stronger or whatever, not just like kill other deities that they dislike or hate, right? Why don't they just destroy them? Well, because again, one thing to consider is the only way a deity could truly like destroy another deity, like without there being like astronomical repercussions for them in some way, would be if they were a deity of a higher level. A greater deity could destroy basically any deity beneath them, whether they're intermediate or lesser, quasi, whatever. They could basically almost probably instantly do that with no real problem or risk to themselves. But exactly because of this, intermediate / lesser deities, they will often, if they have like a particular, like if they're not in good graces of a certain greater deity, or maybe even are an active enemy of a greater deity, they will seek protection from another greater deity that they might have more in common with, or they'll even specifically just offer up almost like, let's say, a tithe or an offering of like divine essence and power, like a portion of their own divine essence and power from like their worshipers or whatever, to the greater deity in return for their protection from their enemy greater deity. And what that does is 2 deities of equal level, of equal, like say they're like of, again, equal divine rank, being either greater or whatever. We'll just, again, in this specific example, 2 greater deities. One, if they were to ever engage in actual combat to try and destroy one another, it is very difficult to ascertain who would win that conflict. If they were both at full power and they came in to attack one another, it's difficult to say for certain, because both of them are at this certain level where like a lot of things are like doesn't even matter. It would really just come down to probably like who has slightly more worshippers than others, and maybe even more so how well they know how to utilize their divine powers in that way. But suffice it to say, regardless, should 2 greater deities ever enter into combat, one of them may win if they both just don't end up destroying each other at the same time completely. If one should win, they would have to do so at astronomical cost to themselves, to the point where they would probably be so weak that either a lesser deity could potentially even kill them, maybe even a quasi deity. If not, just another greater deity who is also an enemy would just come in and finish them off, and then take both their divine portfolio and all their domains, as well as the deity that was also previously killed. So this, in essence, is the deterrent for what keeps a lot of gods, whether they're good or evil, from just going and trying to slaughter one another. Because it would literally just be like, oh, these 2 people fought. Like, let's say, for instance, the gods Lathander, who is basically the human god of the sun, and like mourning and such like that, and like, let's say the dark god Bane, which is like the god of tyranny, darkness, and kind of evil in a lot of ways. Say the 2 of them fought, right? They're both considered greater deities, at least at one point. Technically, Bane isn't anymore. But at one point in time, they were both considered greater deities. Should the 2 of them fight, because they'd be obvious enemies, literally light and dark, let's say Lathander was able to prevail somehow against Bane and killed him, right? Bane's dead, but Lathander would have a huge cost. He would be, again, almost completely weakened at this point. There's nothing really to stop, let's say, Merkel, another god who is a pretty powerful god, coming in and killing Lathander instantly, and at a much lower cost to the fight than it would be if they were both at full power at that point. And then it might even start like a chain reaction domino effect. Another thing to consider is when a god dies, their portfolio, their domains that represent them, if there is no other god to take their place, that's going to start having incredibly adverse effects to the world, the material plane, and the universe at large. Like the world is going to feel it if something like that happens, because it's incredibly, it's an imbalance. It's like a little shockwave of imbalance. It's not supposed to just happen. And so that, in essence, is why a lot of gods, even the greater deities who can do basically anything that they really want, do not directly intervene most of the time, because should they do so, then like kind of the law of causality takes into place, right? If a good greater deity starts directly intervening, then that means a greater bad deity is going to directly start intervening, and essentially they would cancel each other out, if not cause even more untold destruction and mayhem and imbalance, should they begin to do that anyway. Now, that is why they specifically utilize envoys, avatars, other representations or other people or beings to basically take care of their or progress their objectives and desires for them indirectly, right? And they can still be more directly involved. They can communicate. They can grant boons. They can grant, divine kind of protection to a certain extent within reason, of course, because obviously then the law of causality might start to come into place. And again, dark gods might start doing the same with their enemies. But for instance, if a dark god is manipulating a lot of stuff, right, then there's no reason that a good god can't start to manipulate things too in a way to help stuff. And in essence, that is where you have to, as a GM, you have to be a little bit more maybe aware of like what your gods, again, whether or not you're going to take the pre-established pantheon in a pre-established setting, or even if you homebrew your own world, right? What is some of the coolest things you could ever possibly do for your party than introducing them to a god, or letting them know that a god is watching over them, interacting with them, and providing maybe even a bit of support here or there as they can, a little bit of protection, especially when things seem to be at their darkest, right? Mm-hmm. They are facing incredibly powerful, dangerous, insurmountable odds. But right at that moment, a divine essence that swarms kind of around them and fills them with a sense of like warmth and comfort and protection of like, hey, you don't have to be afraid because you're not alone in this. It might seem like you have no chance, but I am with you and I will provide you with as much power and as much protection as I am capable of doing within reason. Doesn't mean you have to literally be like, don't worry, I'll destroy everything for you. Unless, unless maybe like you're a level 20 cleric who has divine intervention and can just do that instantly. Even then, a god is still like, I can't necessarily just do everything for you, but that gives me a little bit more leeway to intervene if you literally have the level 20 divine intervention, whatever.
Well, I think it's one of those things where you have to look at
Sam,
like
I think you're muted.
I shouldn't be. You can't hear me?
I can't hear you. Sorry, hold on 1 second. Technical difficulty.
Can you hear me now?
No. I mean,
shit.
Hello?
Hey, what's up?
Oh, there we go. Maybe it was me instead. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah. Okay, as long as you can hear me, that's good.
Yeah, now I can. Maybe it was my headset. I don't know what happened there. Weird. Either way, sorry. Continue.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say,
maybe edit that out.
I feel like there's a case to be made. The fact that you can be on the material plane as these people who kind of embody the ideals of these deities, and that you're the one doing the change for them, because they can't necessarily always reach these places. And I think that makes the case of like, there are lesser deities that will hide, on the material plane from larger deities for this mistake, for the pretense of, if I'm here, they can't get me. Mm-hmm. And there's, there's evidence of that within the books, within stories told before, myths and
there's
legends.
All kinds of sources referencing that.
I think that's a good thing to think about. As, I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, but like, there are these beings exist that could be considered lesser deities, whether it's in the material plane, the Feywild, these other planes that don't necessarily have, it's not a
Oh
god's
yeah, we
domain.
would call it like quasi. They would be considered probably
Most, I
quasi
think, I mean, there are
deities.
instances of legitimate lesser deities existing on those planes. They have a full form that can be killed on these other planes. I mean, Lolth is an example. Lolth is considered a lesser deity that can be killed. You can come into direct mortal touch with this person. They are considered a god. They are worshipped by many. They are very powerful, but their existence is something that a mortal can interact with. That can't be
Yes.
said for all the gods. You're not going to go meet Asmodeus. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to meet him in the flesh and kill him. You could kill an avatar. You could keep him from doing something, but the reality is you are not going to kill some of these gods. They exist beyond
No,
beyond the
it's
mortal
like
chain.
we should even
Whereas,
say, for instance, like yeah, lesser gods, like you can encounter them much more often. Even them, like you're not gonna be able to kill them by any
no,
normal means.
but what I mean is,
Like,
while gods may fight each other and leave scars and lasting things and have grudges, their lesser deities are kind of unique in the sense that a mortal can change their existence
yes,
and interfere with
like
it quite heavily compared to,
it.
let's say, a greater deity.
Yes.
And it is a legitimate fear. I think something that can be
Oh
played
yeah.
into a lot of these lesser deities, which I find which for me makes them a lot more interesting. These are gods that, while they are very powerful, while they could kill you very easily, if you get the one up on them somehow, some way, whatever
You
circumstances
still
given,
pose a threat.
you pose a direct threat.
Is the thing. Like
Um,
Sam was saying, for instance, if you were to encounter, we can even reference, let's say, a module that Sam is playing, Rise of the Dragon Queen.
Mhm.
Uh,
Rise of Tiamat, yeah.
yeah, the Rise of Tiamat and Horde of the Dragon Queen. Like it's essentially, and again, spoilers, but that book's been out for a while now. So
I've
if you
already read it. So.
it's just like I don't really know what to tell you, man. Spoilers, you can directly fight Tiamat in that module. And not directly. We say directly because again, any deity that has achieved true divinity, and that means lesser deity at the very least, they have what are known as avatars that they can conjure, because like their true essence is obviously almost something that still can't really be comprehended by mortals in a lot of ways. Like they have transcended like that normal kind of concept in a sense, but they can still create and conjure avatars to literally directly control and to as a projection almost, right, of themselves. And should you destroy those avatars, those things can be directly killed, destroyed, whatever. That will have that will have, again, astronomical effects on the lesser deity. Like that, they will not escape unscathed, as opposed a greater deity, for instance, can do the same, but destroying their avatar won't really have much effect on them themselves. It's almost like a direct disconnect where they're just like, yeah, I'm a projection, I'm here now, you can destroy it, doesn't matter.
It's well within the rules of engagement. And like the reality is, if you were powerful enough, you could go to Tiamat's plane and fight her directly.
Yeah,
I would not advise it.
You probably would lose there. There's almost no way unless you're yourself like a demigod. But yeah, like,
but the reality is, if you had enough powerful people that showed up there, and you could, in theory, actually kill a lesser deity, the odds of you doing anything to a greater deity that has any lasting impression is second to none. There is no real.
There's kind of only a small like one.
It's the smallest 1% thing. The reality being, the reason that is that they have a lesser impact directly on the material plane in terms of direct intervention, whereas a lesser deity is someone that is a lot closer.
They are far closer and far more active. Again, like Sam said, Tiamat, Lolth technically would be considered, I think, a lesser deity in 5th edition at this point. She used to be much more powerful. But she lost a lot
of things went down in the Crown Wars.
That as well as plenty of other stuff. Like again, the thing being, she's still astronomically powerful. She's on the upper tier of lesser deities for sure, because she has the monopoly on like the Drow, right?
Yeah.
That provides a lot when you have so much like just focused, concentrated, intense worship. The zeal of worship is also something that affects the amount of power that a deity has, right? That's why dark gods, for instance, even though they might not have as many people openly worshiping them, their zeal, their intensity, and their devotion, like again, sacrifices, right? Like when you do stuff like that, that provides an even more intense amount of divine energy and essence to a deity, which is why dark gods can still be considered greater deities and be high, be all there, even though they might not necessarily have as many open worshippers as good deities would.
Well, for context, I mean, looking at what we were talking about earlier with the ranking system, which I'm sure we went over already.
A little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about the more specific
Tiamat,
kind of open.
Tiamat on this ranking is the upper end, like the highest end of lesser deity, just on the cusp.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Saloon is right in the middle of, like, right just under greater deity, right, on intermediate.
She's intermediate. Yeah. So like specifically, we can talk a little bit about this. This will also maybe help you guys to better understand kind of the power rankings of divinity. As put with divine rank, for instance. So divine rankings can essentially go from like 0 all the way up to 20 being the cusp of or the limit of greater deity status. And then there is like the belief that you can go beyond greater deity to higher ranks that would basically just make you an over deity. And we'll talk about the over deity in a second as well, because he is also important for, again, the reason why gods have these rules and regulations. The over deity of a world is the one that usually that enforces these rules and regulations on the other gods and keeps them in check from just destroying or messing around with things that they shouldn't be doing, right? So essentially at rank 0 for your divine rank, a creature of rank 0 are sometimes referred to as quasi-deities or hero deities. These creatures that have a mortal and a deity as a parent also fall into this category. These entities cannot grant spells, but are usually immortal and have one or more ability scores that are far above the norm for their species. They may have some worshippers. However, ordinary mortals do not have a rank of divine 0 or divine rank of 0, and they lack a divine rank altogether. So creatures and beings with the rank of 0 are essentially like, entities that have like a mortal, one mortal parent, one mortal or one deity of a parent, and like they could be considered, again, demigods, sort of. That's technically another ranking within here. It's slightly higher than quasi/hero deity, but you can think of rank 0 maybe almost like level 20 characters are getting pretty close. Like level 20 characters, like the one step below this rank 0, because they would almost be considered hero deities at that point, right?
The way I kind of think of it, specifically for the hero deity, right, is I'll give an example. Like Conan from Conan Barbarian.
Yeah.
Like the fact that this is a person who, all walks of life, fought against gods, monsters, and all types of men, and is now a legend amongst the species. That's kind of just the one step further from like a level 20 character. It's those
a little bit like
it's ostensibly the level 20 characters that your characters look up to as legends.
Yeah,
those are hero deities. They're
think
people that
like
surpassed that limit, that you might never see them or come in contact with them, but they exist somewhere.
Let's even use, like, again, characters from the Forgotten Realms. Like, for instance, Elminster, probably being one of the most popular overall, would be considered a rank 0, a hero deity. Like, he at this point would probably be considered immortal. I don't think he ages really anymore at this point. He can't grant spells to others, but he's obviously he's the greatest wizard in history so far. Except for maybe Karsus, but either way. Elminster being one, Tasha would be another person who would probably be considered like a rank 0, if not maybe have achieved demigod status sometimes, but then loses it. Like she is kind of all over the place too. It's hard to really say with her. Technically the Dead 3 started as quasi deities. Well, they started out as mortals who then became
quasi deities,
quasi,
and then
who then became lesser
and greater,
intermediate,
deities.
and then greater. Yeah. Like, I mean, heck, even like the Raven Queen technically started out as, you know, all of these gods. A lot of them started out as mortals and then became Vecna. Technically Mistra, like the newest Mistra, technically was a mortal. So yeah, basically, like, rank 0 is that, you know, cusp where like your characters at level 20 are like just below rank 0. Because again, once you start to become immortal, and immortality has more to do with you're not gonna die by like aging, for instance. You like, you can still be like killed, like you can still be like taken out like that, destroyed, but you won't die by just simple like time, old age, or most other kind of natural, so to speak, things, you know. Above rank 0, however, obviously, is going to be rank 1 through 5, and rank 1 through 5 is going to be your demigod status. These entities, called demigods, are the weakest of the deities. A demigod can grant spells and perform a few deeds that are beyond mortal limits. A demigod has anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand devoted mortal worshippers and may receive veneration or respect from many more. A demigod controls a small godly realm, usually on an outer plane, and has minor control over a portfolio that includes one or more aspects of mortal existence. A demigod might be very accomplished in a single skill or a group of related skills, gain combat advantages in special circumstances, or be able to bring about minor changes in reality itself related to their portfolio. A demi-power is the weakest type of deity, however, and it is below a lesser god, intermediate god, and greater god in strength. Demigods are usually ascended mortals that haven't had time to establish a large church yet. Torm was formerly a demigod before he defeated Bane and was resurrected by Ao. Other examples of demigods include Velsharun and Finder Wyvernspur. So we're going to talk a little bit about, again, that last part too, where like Torm was able to like rise above demigod status by defeating Bane, who at that point in time, I believe, was at least intermediate, if not greater deity status, maybe. I forget the exact moment where that happened. He may have already lost a lot of power, but Bane at one point was a greater deity of like astronomical power. But we will specifically say, again, we'll keep going as a moment. The next rank, being lesser deity, is rank 6 through 10. Rank 6 through 10, called lesser deities. These entities grant spells and can perform more powerful deeds than demigods can. Lesser deities have anywhere from a few thousand to tens of thousands of worshippers and control larger godly realms than demigods. They also have keener senses where their portfolios are concerned. The next rank up, intermediate, would be rank 11 through 15, and these entities are called intermediate deities. They have hundreds of thousands of mortal worshippers and control larger godly realms than demigods or lesser deities. The next rank, being greater, are rank 16 through 20. These entities may have millions of mortal worshippers, and they command respect even among other deities. The most powerful of greater deities rule over other deities, just as mortal sovereigns rule over commoners. As I kind of said before, the reason for this is usually for protection from other greater deities who would seek to destroy those lesser ones. And so therefore, they are often needed to, you know, others are needed to kind of like go under the umbrella of a different greater deity to have protection from others. It might not always be that as well. It might also be the fact that a greater deity, because of their greater power, they have a more expansive portfolio of domains, right? And so lesser deities, what they control in their portfolio might fall under the purview of a greater deity. And so therefore they would kind of be not necessarily subservient sometimes, yes, but just more so kind of under almost like the tutelage or like mentorship in a sense, almost from like a greater deity. And then finally, there's the rank 21 plus, which is considered to be over God deity status. These entities are beyond the kin of mortals and care nothing for worshippers. They no longer need people to worship them for them to be where they're at. They have transcended above transcendence. You know what I mean? They do not grant spells. They do not answer prayers, and they do not respond to queries of any kind. If they are known at all, it is to a handful of scholars on the material plane, and they are called over-deities. In some pantheistic systems, the consent of an over-deity is required to become a true god. Now, for this particular thing, some of you might be aware, others might not. The Forgotten Realms does have an over-deity, or I should say not even just the Forgotten Realms. I guess technically maybe even all of D&D has an established over-deity, and his name is Ao, as was mentioned earlier about his whole interaction with Torm and by defeating Bane, right? Ao is the over god of D&D at the moment. He might just be part of Forgotten Realms, but I doubt it, technically speaking. I just don't think he's really been represented or depicted in any other setting except for the Forgotten Realms presently. So I can't say for certain, but again, as an overgod, and since many of these other gods are present in other settings, I would only have to assume that he as well could do that. Because he is the overgod of 5th edition, especially, but certainly older editions too, 3.5, plenty of other things. He is the guy that controls all of their gods. No god can go against him. He can literally do whatever he wants. In fact, some of you might know some of the lore of D&D with like the spell plague, the time of troubles, all of that. A lot of that was directly because of decisions that Lord Ao made to the gods. Like he can instantly take away any god's divinity right away. Doesn't matter. He can give any mortal divinity that he believes is worthy. Like that is in essence like the overgod is literally one step down from the GM, right? The only thing higher than an overgod is the GM themselves. The GM is the over god, the absolute god, as it were. But that in essence is like the focused, like expansive version of the divine ranking system, right? We can even use some maybe well-known gods, as Sam just did earlier, as an example. Like for instance, Tiamat and Bahamut. They're both in this particular ranking system. They are divine rank 10. As Sam said, that is literally like the peak of lesser deity status, the both of them. They're not quite at intermediate or above that, but they're at the peak of that moment. So is Azuth, who would basically be like Mystra's right-hand deity. He used to be a mortal wizard of astronomical power, like Elminster. He was a lover of Mystra, and she petitioned for his ascension to Lord Ao, which he allowed, and he became the god of mages and spells. He's a really cool god. Right above that, the god Helm is like at the absolute bottom tier of intermediate deity at rank 11. And Helm is really cool. He used to be way more powerful too, but he, I believe, was destroyed by, was it Bane? I forget who, maybe Jurgle? I forget who took Helm out. Somebody did, and then he was like absorbed by like by Torm, I believe. And a lot of stuff happened, but he's still technically kind of around. It's hard to say, again, because a lot of this stuff is much more abstract.
It's definitely also allowed this. Obviously, we're saying, oh, this happened. Oh, this happened. Well, at any given point in time, especially if you're running your own game with your own ideas for the gods, that stuff can be moved around, I think.
Yeah, you do not have to follow. Like, this is just, again, in the established vanilla lore. Like, you know, because you can obviously make any of these gods as powerful as you want. For instance, those some of the more powerful gods that you might be more aware of, for instance, like at greater status, would be Corellon Larethian. He is the patriarch god of the elves, right? Mm-hmm. He's the most powerful god of the elves, the patriarch of their pantheon. He is at a divine rank of 19. He's not even 20. He's being he is the highest of the elves, and he's only at 19. The same would be said for Moradin, which would be the patron god of the dwarves, as well as most other like patron gods of whatever pantheon, right? The humans don't really have
Glittergold.
Well, Garl is like he has his own thing. Like he like a lot of the the gnomes like because he also is like he's isn't he trapped somewhere? I forget, because even Garl Glittergold is at rank 18 currently, so he's still up there. But like
he leads the gnomish pantheon.
Yeah, humans don't really have a like main god. Again, they're probably the most one would be Chantia, who would ironically be like the most powerful like normal god, which is interesting because she's the goddess of like agriculture and farming, but that's why she's so powerful, because there are so many farmers and stuff.
She also it's myth or legend, but it's said that she created all life on the material plane.
That is true. But she's Shantia is awesome. Love Shantia. And she's ironically, funny enough, despite the fact that nothing in her portfolio, she's not a battle goddess. She doesn't really have a lot of but she is the strongest. And so no one can really contend with her except for like, for Lord AO, really. Like Coralon, Morden, maybe, like, but even then, hard to say. Mistra,
they're kind of all in there. The cool thing about when you get this high in divine rank is they're all their own. They're all part of their own thing.
Yeah, they literally have their own realities, like, and not just their own, multiple realities that they interact with, contend with, all across the multiverse, right? The omniverse. Mistra is divine rank 18, as you would probably expect. She's the literal goddess of magic. She is the weave itself. Below her, interestingly enough, is Shar, who is also still technically divine rank 18. But technically, Mistra, or rather, I guess her previous iteration, Mistral, spawned from Shar and Selûne. Like, she's like the original goddess of magic was like the direct daughter of Selûne and Shar, which is cool. And it's funny now at this point, Mistra's probably a bit more powerful than Shar is at this point. Sylvanas, the Oak Father, would be another rank 18. He's up there. Torm is up there as well. In this one, it specifically says Bane and Cyric are both like divine rank 17, which I don't think that's true. So this particular spreadsheet that we have here, I don't think is the most up to date with everything happening in 5th edition, like presently, to be fair. Because Bane is definitely no longer a rank 17 greater deity at this point.
Although the Dead 3 or the Dread 3 or the Dark 3, depending on in what iteration you want to talk about them, there's obviously something to be said about kind of the life cycles of worship and gods. There are plenty of deities that, depending on your edition, depending on your module, depending on where you want to be set, are in different stages of existence, rebirth, death, and reverence, which is kind of like, we're using this as a template to explain kind of what's capable and what isn't. This is all relatively easy to switch around and justify, and like, so. To be fair, justifiably so. Yeah. There is a reality where Shantae is still a very powerful being, but if half the world is, destroyed or toxified or degrading, the mother of harvest and grain goddess and the earth mother is not going to have nearly the same hold that she would in a normal material plane. No. And that's kind of the idea of why these beings are all so separate in their, how do I put it, not their order, but like just their representation. The god of bards isn't going to have as much power if society doesn't respect the arts. You know what I mean? So if like there's, you look at like
they rise and fall all the time.
You look at like, for example, the time of the plague in our reality, the Black Death, when art and patronage and those things were an all-time low across our globe. The god of bards and trickery and things like that, they're not going to be as powerful. It's just warranting on the existence of
it does not fall under their purview of their divine portfolio or domain. So they wouldn't have as much direct ability to intervene or interact with that.
Now, they might still be just as powerful in their own domain, but if there's no one pressing for that domain to be a little bit closer to the material plane, then there's no pull. And so I think that's kind of like when you look at some of the gods that maybe did exist, don't exist anymore, have fallen from grace, you can make a case that any of them could get back to status even higher than they started with. And that's kind of the beauty of systems like this, of a loose pantheon or a tight one, because there are always going to be secret things happening behind the scenes that you don't necessarily know
about that will switch up the divine ranking system all the time. It's kind of crazy how much. You know what's interesting? I can't find the the patron god of the, or well, I shouldn't say patron god, but the ruling god of the goblins. I can't find Maglubiet on this list.
Yeah, so I don't know
Grumsh.
I don't think Maglubiet is a 5th edition god.
He is.
Well, I think he was used before that, so I don't know if he's considered.
I mean,
a
he
main
was.
deity.
He was. He is that for sure. Like they literally even referenced him in Baldur's Gate 3. Actually, like
They did do that.
he is. He's definitely a mainline god because he is the god of the goblins. Like that is one of the biggest reasons why the goblins are the way that they are, because he is like Lolth. He is a tyrannical god of their race.
Yeah.
Like, and he
I don't even
rules
see
them with a face. I see Grumsh, which is like I'm a little confused why they didn't include Maglubiet in this, because
well, that's what I was gonna say. They have changed goblins a couple times now, so I don't know if everything's still the same.
I think it would be like goblins.
I mean,
again,
hey, I'm saying you're most likely correct. What I'm gonna, I didn't
it
know that
might
they were.
be.
I didn't know that they changed them
know.
to Fae.
Yeah. So, well, that's the thing, because goblins and hobgoblins are more like they did that with a lot of stuff that made more sense, right? Like even like for instance, doppelgangers and changelings, right?
Yeah,
they are technically from Celtic Fae lore. Like that is where they are originally from. And so like the fact that they made them like, yeah, they're more in line with Fae. Like, yeah, it's like that is the source material, which made sense. Same thing for goblins. They are also very much more Fae adjacent and related. But it also just makes sense again, like, because that, like, for instance, Grumsh and Maglubiet are like similar to the Blood War. They're locked in like an endless battle against each other on Acheron or whatever, which is cool. But I was just kind of bringing it up because I thought it was funny. I'm like, I see Grumsh, but no Maglubiet. Interesting. But either way, that in essence kind of gives you guys, again, a little bit more insight into maybe the more specific differences in power of all the deities, right? And why they might be at a difference of power. Again, Corellon, Larethian, and this list, to be fair, is probably not the most up-to-date accurate of current events. And like, if you are playing in the current, like, modern day setting of like Forgotten Realms. But, you know, Corellon Larethian is the patron god of the elves. He is at a rank 19. In comparison, however, Lolth, where is she? Right there. Lolth is at a divine rank of 16. So she's 3 levels below him.
mm-hmm.
Even though she is the matron goddess of the Drow, which is a subsect of elves. But they're obviously not clearly as wide and expansive as the rest of the elves, right? She's still super powerful. She's still a greater deity in this. Like she's at the lower low of greater deity status at a 16, like on this list, but she's still not even anywhere near as high as Corellon is at that point, despite the fact that she has like a lower subsect of Drow elves. So yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of amazing gods, and this again, I like this ranking system because again, it also just gives you a little bit more. Like for instance, any greater deity, even if they're higher, like Corellon could probably destroy Lolth because he's a rank 19, she's 16, he's higher. He could probably do it, right? If they fought, he would most likely win. However, he would not win without great cost to himself. Like you can maybe even just say like it would be like 16 or like 16 minus or 19 minus 16, right? He'd be left with a divine rank of like 3, right? So that being the case, like he would be that weakened for a while, and almost any other divine rank could then come up, take him out, and absorb his portfolio and domain at that point, right? And so that in essence is why deities don't just willy-nilly fight each other. Also, because AO normally doesn't like that stuff either. AO is also very much like, no, you all are supposed to be doing your job, managing the fabric and elements of reality to keep it running smoothly and in balance. You are not allowed to just start trying to destroy each other, because obviously here's the thing. A god's power doesn't just increase just with worshipers. A god gets more powerful the more aspects of reality they have in their portfolio. So again, if you're like, say, for instance, you're the god of, spells, right? Like a Zeus. You are like, you are a god over like, hey, innovation of spells. You help create new spells, or you help inspire people to create new spells. And that you would become even more powerful if you were like, okay, I'm now the god of magic. Right? If you could get magic itself under your portfolio, it would be more than just spells. You'd be like, oh, magical effects, magical creatures, magical whatever, just magic incarnate. That would increase your power beyond just spells now. If you could get, oh, I'm the god of magic, spells, and freedom. Like that would increase even more so. Like you could be like, hey, freedom. Who doesn't love freedom? Everyone loves freedom. The people who would pray to you, the amount of power you would get from that concept alone would astronomically increase your power. And so that's, again, gods are often maybe like they are incited or greedy at times to try and take out other gods, because if you take that god out, you can absorb their portfolio and their domains. You can take that for yourself if it falls under your purview, of course. But usually if it's adjacent, you can take that and put it under yourself, and that would also increase your power because you'd have more direct connections to those aspects of reality. So now that we've kind of like explained a little bit more about gods, how they work in the game specifically and all that, again, let us talk a little bit more about maybe some decent ways you can implement them in your game now that you kind of know the mechanics of it, and therefore maybe some of their motivations, right? Why they do what they do, why they don't do what maybe people would wonder they could do, for me, as I think prefaced or said at the beginning of the video, is like, I've played a number of campaigns where deities just aren't really present ever, not directly, right? Everybody knows that they're there. They are. Everybody says, oh yeah, you get, we have some like divine characters who have like powers and stuff, and maybe worship them, but like they don't necessarily interact directly, even when you're like in a temple for them, right? You're in a temple for them, it's under attack, or maybe it's like under some sort of duress, and you're doing this thing to help protect them and to help reestablish their clergy or something or whatever. In those kinds of moments, it's like I feel it wouldn't be out of the realm of realism or interest to be like, hey, maybe you get a sense of like thank you, or maybe you like receive some kind of sign or some kind of inclination of like they recognize your your efforts, they recognize what you have done, and they're going to keep an eye on and watch on you now. And then like maybe like 20 sessions down the line, if you're able to play that long, God willing, maybe you're in a situation where you're hard pressed for resources, you're in a dangerous moment where maybe your party is about to be wiped, and then all of a sudden, I don't know, like maybe it's like, oh, for some reason you feel something energize you get like a spell slot back or something, as like a blessing, or as like a thing to help you from doing something that helped a god earlier, especially if you're part of their portfolio, right? Let's say you as a wizard, you went to a temple of Mistra that was like dilapidated, destroyed, or maybe like defiled or whatever, and you cleansed it, right? As me and Sam were saying before, you don't have to be a pious or like religious or whatever character to still receive boons, protection, and insight even from gods. Because if you just are a part of their portfolio, if you're a part of their domain, they will still do everything they can to keep that going and to have that prosper, right?
Yeah.
So as a wizard, you fall under both Azuth as well as Mistra, as well as if you're an elf, Coralon, they will always do their best to kind of keep an eye on you, and especially if you are a prominent figure in person. And so that's one example I gave in terms of like, hey, maybe give the gods a more active role. You can give your characters visions in their dreams about things maybe that they need to know, or a direction to go, right? Excuse me. I think we also talked about this a number of times in some other videos about like, giving your players maybe an ability to have more insight into a situation, right? have a god give them some prophetic dreams and such. That will literally be a perfectly reasonable, logical way of being like, hey, here's maybe something that you need to know that you maybe wouldn't have been able to find out an easier way, or not easier, sorry. You wouldn't have been able to find out like without doing something incredibly difficult or hard, or going to a very specific place that maybe you didn't really know about due to certain choices. It's like you still have a means of granting them boons, of granting them rewards for certain things that they do, right? I'm all, and maybe this is just my personal preference as a GM. I'm always looking to try to reward my players in as many possible ways as I can if they are attempting to do benevolent, cool things, right? I don't always just want to set them up with like, hey, you have another problem after another problem after another problem after another problem. It's like, maybe offer them a bit of a break. Give them some good things, because there are good creatures and good beings that are also active in the world, right? It's not just evil and darkness that's always on the move and always, doing their machinations to try to control or destroy reality. There are good entities as well. So give them those moments where that shows, right? Yeah. Good is also being active, as is evil. And so give them a little bit. And I know some people might want to like make the argument, well, that's just so like, it's lame because it's so easy and it's a deus ex machina thing. Like they didn't like work for it. It's like they have been working for it. They've been playing the game. They've been doing their best. Like give them, it's okay sometimes to give them that thing. They've been struggling and pushing and fighting, risking their lives, literally. Give them some things sometimes. You're just like, you know what? You guys get this cool thing. You know what? Because the gods are trying to help you.
Well, I think it's funny that you say like, oh, it's like such a, they're not working for it. And it's one of those things where more often than not, the bad people or evil people or enemy NPCs that you come in contact with are getting things from beings and deities all the time.
Higher power all the time.
No offense, it's not like they're working any harder or less, like, or more hard or less. Like it's, in some cases, there are people that you're going to go fight who, yes, they've been doing this for, they're a lich. They've been studying for thousands of years, and here they are.
Their plans have been in the motion for millennia,
Or there's someone who happened to be evil enough to get noticed by someone who's like, I like what you're doing with the place.
I'm gonna help.
They're a lot more powerful than they should be, and that's kind of, if you're gonna do it for bad characters, if you're gonna do it for people that you want your players to fight, there's nothing wrong with a helping hand. And even like from what you said, it could be the simple stuff, prophesizing dreams, even a god just letting a player know in some way
that something is going on,
that there's something behind them. Like, in like a morality sense. You have a player that isn't necessarily like, maybe they're not a cleric, maybe they don't have a relationship with anything, but you've noticed them be,
are we doing the right thing?
Like they might be a morally virtuistic character, whether that's from their backstory, whether that's how they've decided to play. And you've been playing for long enough, or they've done enough things that you as a DM are like, they should know that someone appreciates what they're doing.
Yeah.
Not the mortals that they're doing it for, not the people around them in the party, but someone, something should let them know. And even just giving them that pat on the back, that recognizing what they're doing, I think speaks worlds more than just giving them a power up, more than just giving them an instance of doing really well at something. Just acknowledgement, I think, goes a long way. And even in that sense, like down the road, one of my favorite things, I think, as a concept is, in dire straits, there is nothing that stops them from maybe getting just a sprinkle of that divine favor in something that they do. And I think that's something that is underutilized.
I agree.
And I think it wouldn't be that hard.
It's okay to give, like, again, and maybe that's, like I said, I'm a bit biased, to be fair, because I am a GM, I am a player and a GM. I want the party to succeed. I want them to be able to do these cool things that they want to do. And so I am always of a mind of like, hey, what can I, but I obviously, like, again, to anybody's argument, I also don't want to necessarily just give it to them, right? Because then that has the risk of undercutting their efforts to succeed, right? If you don't have like if you don't have the chance or the potential for failure, then your success or victory feels kind of cheap and unearned at times. And I agree. And I feel that way. I get that. But there's many ways to help support and bolster the party in a fair, reasonable manner that doesn't have to undercut their efforts, such as, like Sammy said, you're in a particularly like hardcore, like, you know, pinnacle, finale, climax, fight, or moment, or something. This is important. And if they want to succeed, this is like the moment where like everybody's like, okay, everybody, hang on. All right, you have to roll like a whatever this to succeed on this, you know? Why not give them then, if they like roll decently or if they roll super bad, either way, be like, okay, you feel a strange like you are in this moment where you're like, you are putting in all your best effort, but you know in that split second you're going to fail. You don't have whatever. And then right as that moment, that thought crosses your mind, some amount of comfort, revitalizing energy or something shoots through your being. And maybe you give them like, I give you a +5 on the check, or I give you the ability, you can re-roll now at advantage or something. Like, you know, you basically, it's like the equivalent of like, hey, you get like a bardic inspiration, but as a god, you don't need to roll for that crap. You're just automatically inspired for like the max amount of that bardic die or something, you know?
Or something like even like you're fighting a big monster or something, and like, you know, half your party's down and it's really looking bad, and they spend all their resources on one last big hit, and it's crazy, and you're like, you're looking at the sheet and this monster has 10 hit points left.
Yeah.
But they're gonna go next and they're gonna kill everyone on the board.
Yeah.
There's nothing, I mean, really, this is a story, right? Giving them a sprinkle of that divine power.
It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy world.
That's, I think, something that plays into the aspect of, you're not taking away the agency of your player at that point, because they are putting their all into this.
Yeah.
And they just need
You're not giving it to them.
No,
like,
they just, that's something that they don't get unless they did something beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. If they've put in the time, if they put in the effort, if they're engaged, if they're involved, like, again, it's like, once more, these gods want them to succeed, right?
Yeah,
just like the dark beings, dark gods who are working behind the scenes want to cause all kinds of chaos and destruction. These good gods want them to succeed. So then showcase that. And that's in essence the thing that I guess, again, me and Sammy both, as we said, we feel is maybe lacking a bit. Sometimes. Where it's just like, you know, if there are bad forces at work, there are also good forces. And these good forces don't have to be nearly as passive or as uninvolved as it seemed like the case. Because, like, again, I get it. It's a slippery slope to be involving gods and stuff like that. But it's like they are accurate. And so, again, we gave you kind of that earlier rundown to give you maybe a little bit more understanding of why, and maybe a bit more excuses and reasons to utilize for why they can't just directly intervene, and for the reasons why they can, and some examples of what they could give those players and those characters to provide them with some extra bang for their buck, you know, and to give those moments where you're like, I don't like, this was such a good fight. Like, I don't want to kill these guys right now. Like, I don't want them to TPK right here. Like, just remember, there are good gods in the world, and they will look to help and to offer guidance and protection and strength in their darkest, most, you know, hopeless moments. Don't forget that. You know, it's really easy to remember the dark evil gods because they're always at work, right? They're the adversaries. You have to make that stuff happen for then the players to have those obstacles to contend with. But there's also good stuff behind them that can bolster and support them and allow them that extra oomph that they need if they fall short, especially if it's just from the roll of a die, right?
Yeah. And I think that there's also like, let's I'm gonna put this out there because I think it needs to be said, because not every deity is good, not every deity is bad, not every deity is lawful or chaotic or neutral. There isn't two sides to this coin. there's a reason we like to roll dice for
Yeah.
things like this,
Yeah.
is that these things are many faceted. And I think I'm not saying to make your players into an avatar of this god at level 12 and be like, look at all the cool things you get to do when I say you get to do them. I don't personally like that. I've played in a campaign where that has happened before. I will give the DM credit. His whole vibe, which I respect immensely, he's very open with it. He wants us to be superheroes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what he wants for us to be. He wants us to feel like superheroes.
Yeah.
Now, he has built his world and he has told his story around that fact. There are things we can pull from. There are things that in the world that we directly have connections to that are important. And I like that. It makes us feel powerful.
Yeah. That sounds
I
pretty
also
badass.
think it would be very funny if more people looked at our relationship with the gods in D&D the same way that you should look at a warlock and their patron. Because for me, one of the reasons why a lot of people don't play warlock is because the warlock patron relationship is not pushed enough in a D&D campaign. We've touched upon this before.
Yeah, a little bit.
I bashed the crap out of it when we did our first class video with warlock. Because I love the class and I think it only works when you play with a DM who actually puts even a modicum of effort into making that patron relationship.
I mean, that is another huge thing about this too. Like, again, it's the same concept, right? That is another huge aspect of that. And again, like we said, we also introduced the concept of like quasi deities, right?
Lesser deities, things that aren't as all powerful.
Usually a warlock's patron would be considered these types of creatures, an archfey, an archfiend, a genie, a dragon, even technically speaking, of sufficient power, a celestial, plenty of these things are like of these quasi deity statuses where they're, again, clearly more powerful. They are immortal by all manners, by all standards of measurement. They're not going to die by age or time. They can be destroyed, but they can't necessarily be like actively, whatever, or I'm sorry, passively killed. And so, like, again, same thing as Sam was saying, like, for GMs, if you're going to have a warlock character, their patron is absolutely essential. It's integral to their whole dynamic for where they get their powers, their personality, probably in a lot of ways, the contract that they made with that patron for what that means. Like, that is another aspect where it's like, it's like you gotta, like, because at that point, what really are warlocks besides just potentially even crappier sorcerers at that point? Like,
the whole point of these beings is that it's supposed to be a relationship outside of what you can immediately see in front of you. And I think the reason why I love the warlock patron relationship and the way pack magic and all that stuff works in fundamentally is the fact that you don't really understand what's going on, but then you get things trickled to you or explained to you in ways where you kind of get it, or sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And I think the gods themselves can be very similar. You may not know exactly why you're picked by someone. You might not know exactly the full extent of your worship. If you are a devout person, you might be devout only in baseline theory, what you know of that deity. I think there's like something to be said for if you come from a small town in the middle of nowhere with a small podunk clergy, but you're very devout in your belief, but you don't know everything. So it's something to be said, like there's still teaching moments. There's still moments where you can deepen or lessen that understanding. And I think that's something that can be used a lot more with players in their relationships to deities, because there's so much information, there's so many stories to tell that are outside of what's written down in lore books. You can have your own backstory for some of the things that some of these gods have done, and those stories might influence a character's reception. I think it's something to be said, like a lot of these gods they have their portfolios and their domains. A lot of them share similarities, and a lot of them share like one similarity and the rest are different. And there's something to be said that if you have characters that are maybe unsure, they have kind of an idea of what they believe in, but now maybe something happens and it's broken a little. It's not the same. And something comes in and takes its place and assures that there's still someone looking out for them. I think those things can be very powerful
Yeah.
that don't necessarily have to be a game mechanic. You don't have to necessarily lose or get anything in the process. There's somebody who said, like, say I'm a cleric in the trickery domain, and the original god I picked is not, something happens in the story, something happens my character learns, or they're not getting the responses that they're looking for, but they end up finding a new deity in the same domain that maybe is a little bit more receptive, maybe a little bit closer to home, so to speak. And that's something that, like, you don't necessarily have to change the mechanics of their class or give them anything extra or take anything away, but these are
that
things
flavor, that
that
role play.
exactly. There's a reason this is a 3-pillar game. That's, I love that phrase. It's one of my favorite things when I look at it.
The 3 pillars.
Role play is just as important as combat mechanics or exploration. There is something to be said that makes these characters more alive. And I think interacting with a wider array of beings in your campaign is something that is extremely important in that fact. It's something that can enrich everything that a character does, whether it's for right or wrong reasons, whether it's gods, eldritch horrors, demigods, quasi, it doesn't matter. Anything from that list of beings, even if it's not necessarily a god per se, whether it's something outside of understanding, whether it's even just entry-level celestials in a domain from a god. That's one of my favorite things. Is like, it doesn't have to be the god. It could be someone that is loosely associated. That's like, hey, what's up? Like, like, it could be that simple. It doesn't have to be, oh, this greater deity is shining his, visage upon me. No. It could be as cryptic as you want it to be, but the fact that there's acknowledgement, I think, is where it falls short.
It's just so nice. Like for me, I feel like, again, in terms of just, like Sam has just been saying, the liveliness and the realness, quotation marks, again, as we always try our best to say, one of the things we love to say at the Arcane Archive is probably the best, the highest level of D&D is to find that sweet spot between reality and fantasy, right? And so having it there, it's like it's almost the equivalent like a video game, right? Where it's like, people love when video games, especially if they're like open world, are populated with things that make it seem more like it's about that immersion aspect, right? Same thing here, where it's just like Sam said, even just the acknowledgement itself, just you can talk to a deity and they let you know, like, hey, you're not alone, right? Because again, I feel like so many D&D games have a tendency to just be very dark in the sense of, like, again, evil and the bad guys, they've been planning this whole thing for, however long, decades to not, centuries and maybe millennia. And so it's like, it's gonna be darkest before the dawn. You're not gonna be able to instantly counteract all the stuff that's been happening because people grow complacent in the light, in peace times. People grow kind of weaker and unaware. And so it's like, but they are by no means unaware of darkness, of the threat. That's why there are like orders, there are people, there are beings, there are all kinds of organizations that maintain exactly for these threats that happen. And so having things where it's just like, hey, and then once again, I understand the reason why, because it is difficult to provide more support and people who are on your side without directly kind of breaking encounters or making it much more difficult for the GM to like manage stuff. If you have to worry about both enemy NPCs as well as friendly NPCs all engaging together, like, even though it is much more realistic to be like, hey, yeah, our characters aren't just the single only group of people who are capable and able to know about and handle this situation, right? There are others. There are other people who will be part and will help and will offer their strength, their resources, their assistance to this thing, including, higher beings such as gods. Hey, you could even specifically just be like, hey, there's some demon shenanigans going on, enlist the help of a devil. They will almost always be down to take out some demon crap, because
Oh my God, like
they are arch enemies. You know what I mean?
So not limited, to one thing. And I
They're
think
not
that's
maybe
kind
just
of
good, right?
no,
Like,
it's not
you
even
know,
just gods. It's anything that holds some sway over the planes. Whether that's, archfey, or even what's the one between like normal fey and archfey? There's like they're not quite archfey, but they're still powerful enough to like traverse the plains. And is there a semi?
I don't think there's really like an intermediate between like it's usually just Fae are, their usual levels, and then there's Arch Fae who are like the ascended kind of version.
But there's difference in power. But the reality is like I think, there's a scenario that pops into my head when we talk about, the foreboding dread that can be D&D. This whole thing of like, well, we're adventurers. There's obviously something horrible out there happening. And to me, I think it what pops into my head is, you can have this gigantic battle where a city is demolished and people are killed and displaced, and then there's actual palpable evil in the air. But I think what shines is that, at the end of it all, or maybe you've ran and you've saved people and you're now at a camp full of people that don't have a home anymore, and one of your players steps up and helps serve food to people. One of your players helps and plays music to try to calm people down. It's one of those things where it's not just about killing evil things. If you make a world that's populated, with enough different people and beings and thoughts, that your players are now like, well, yes, we have to fight this evil thing, but we also have to make sure that the people we're fighting this evil thing for aren't lost in the process. I think that's the golden kind of like where it clicks, I think, for a lot of players, or it can click. I hope it clicks. Is that because if I was playing a bard and we fought this evil, it destroyed a city or a town, say, and whether it was through divine intervention, whether it was through people that were in power that we talked to who helped get some of these people out, and now we're at a camp full of people with intents who have nowhere to go, and you step up and you make people feel at ease, whether that's, whatever kind of character you are, whether that's through giving them supplies, entertainment, food, whatever it is, that is also a moment the gods and other beings of the world look down on you, specifically those characters, specifically these people. And I think that's something that, it's, again, this isn't about fighting. This isn't about killing a bad guy because a god said you could. This is giving your, that song you played just a little bit more oomph to make people actually feel okay. Or, now all of a sudden this food makes these people feel so much better than it should. And it's those little things that I think higher beings can kind of impart in a story. It's not just about fighting. It's not just about giving you the edge. It's so much more than that.
It can be so much more than that. And I think along the lines of it's like it's in the purview of the so-called like good or light gods. Like if you are doing good things in the world, they would want you to keep doing that. And they would do what they could to keep you from to keep you here and to keep you doing that and to help you to accomplish that. Like Sam said, not just in combat or war or whatever, but like they would do what they could to help spread your light continuously to people. If you are doing good things, they want good things to keep happening. And you are again people who have a powerful effect for whatever reason. You are chosen, not even necessarily by them, but just by whatever. And so therefore, you should be a resource. Like I want people to understand, like, player characters should be considered a rare resource. Like they are not a normal group of people. They are supposed to be considered, exceedingly talented, capable, or special for whatever reason. Even when they're, even when they act dumb and stupid, and
that's kind of the point, though.
Yeah, it's like you guys are still of a certain, just, special brew or breed or whatever, because again, you guys are the only creatures in this entire universe, I'm sorry, maybe even multiverse, that aren't controlled by the GM. You know, how I always like to make an example of it is you are all literally the avatars of visiting overgods that are in this world right now. And so therefore, and if you're doing good things, if you're not just being, you know, hobos, you know, like slaughter hobos or whatever, then yeah, I don't see the good gods will be just as willing to help support you as the bad gods are willing to help support the evil people doing bad stuff or whatever, you know,
or even somewhere in the middle. I mean,
or even somewhere in the middle.
It's one of those things where I think the player characters are not only the only ones that can influence things, they're the only ones that can change the course of characters that the DM came up with.
Well, we could even say like other evil gods who might be enemies of an evil god doing things would still be willing to help you if you're able to continue their machinations, right? Again, we also said, especially with greater deities, right? They have less ability to directly intervene, but that is exactly why they look for any and every opportunity and representative that they can connect with, they can provide support to continue to spread and progress their objectives and desires, right? And you know what? I'll even just say it doesn't even have to be part of the overarching story, like Sam was saying. It could literally just be like, hey, you found like a powerful artifact that maybe belonged to this deity. You connect with them and they just start talking. They're just like, hey, what's going on? You know, like even just talking to one of them or interacting in a way is just funny and interesting to be like, dude, I think I just talked with a god. Like, like what, like, you know.
Oh, I think it's one of those things. Like, even if you're not talking to the god themselves, I'm a big proponent of sentience, whether that's through items, whether it's through
that's always super
effects. Fun. But I think something that a lot of DMs maybe miss a little bit is there is nothing. I mean, you give someone a sentient item, whether it's just magic for the sentience sake or it gives them abilities, what have you. The reality is that item also might have a tie to a god, whether or not the sentience is a past worshiper or champion of that deity, good or bad. Now, if your character helps that being maybe fulfill its own wishes, whether that is connected to a deity or not, there's some force there that now connects your character to something. And so, again, it doesn't have to have anything to do with the main story. It can be a complete side thing, but now there is a hook there. There is a thread that leads you right back to something. Whether or not you're going to completely align with that something, you'll find out. But I think now that there is an avenue for someone's influence on a character, whether they are become subservient to that, whether they acknowledge it, or whether they actively fight against it, I think that's already more of an interaction that they have with the world than they did before. And that's, I think, what's important. It doesn't all have to blend together seamlessly. It doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be a picture. It could be a web. It doesn't have to, it doesn't
be
have
little
to
strings tied here and there. And I feel like it's even more like I feel like that's one of the best things about Baldur's Gate 3 too. You interact with so many different like quasi to actual divine, greater divine beings there all the time. Like they're a plethora of them that you are directly interacting with, because there are obviously with them, there are more direct things that they are like connected to, but even smaller things, you see like hints of other stuff that you interact with and you're just like, oh, hey, all right, cool. You know, like even that, it just helps to further immerse your players in this world where gods are known, they are active, they provide support, they do this stuff. And so it's like, hey, yeah, why not have them interact more?
Yeah.
Like, and obviously we say this again, especially when it comes to, let's say, quasi deities who are much more directly impactful, like archfey, archfiends, liches, whatever. Like, you do have to be careful because they are exceedingly powerful, right? And like you don't want to make the mistake of making your party feel like, oh, hey, excuse me. You don't want to just like, enforce divinity on a person, basically being like, hey, I can do whatever I want to you because, you know what I mean? Like that. You want to be careful of that,
Yeah.
because
You
that
don't
can,
want to take away player agency.
yeah, stripping player agency if they aren't doing anything like bad or destructive is usually almost always going to be a huge no-no. It's going to be a huge red flag. Not always. There are certain moments where it's just like, hey, if it provides a purpose to the scenario that's currently happening or the narrative or whatever, then it's like, okay, yeah, fair enough. Sometimes there are moments where you have to do that. But obviously, yeah, if it's like, for instance, like Sam's earlier example, if the players somehow are meeting like Asmodeus, right, in the Nine Hells, right, they went all the way down to Bator, or they went to Bator and they went all the way down to the ninth layer, and they're at his palace somehow or whatever. They're interacting with him. They're not gonna like, you can't. I would hope that they would have the wherewithal to be, respectful to a certain extent, regardless of their station. Because again, I feel like maybe it also is a good way of like, if they interact with more of these types of beings, they begin to have a bit more of an understanding of their power level, right?
Yeah.
And their effect, and therefore it's like, hey, you're not gonna just fight this guy. Like, you can't just fight this thing here. That's not gonna happen. Okay. If it does break out into a fight, you're probably going to lose. Unless there's some kind of, again, like Deus Ex Machina MacGuffin or something.
Which you get too many of those in there and you're gonna lose all.
Again,
nothing's gonna have any substance.
Suspension of disbelief then breaks.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, it's important to utilize those moments, again, realistically, and not to a exorbitant degree, right? That's why we're giving examples of like, give them smaller things to help boost them, unless it's something like super huge, right? They're facing like one of the BBEGs of the thing, and they're like super close. And you, of course, as a GM, this is kind of where you have to utilize a little bit of improvisational skills of like, is it going to make your game more fun, more enjoyable, and better to provide a bit of Deus Ex Machina intervention, divine intervention, for a player or for the players to succeed rather than fail, right? Like,
Yeah.
that is at the end of the day, that is going to be a GM call always. But I guess me and Sam are just hoping, like, again, I know a lot of people might have the mentality, or a lot of GMs might have the mentality of like, well, I'm not gonna intervene. Like, it's just gonna be the roll of the dice, and we're just gonna, whatever, what happens happens. And it's like, yeah, okay, it's good to, again, have a certain amount of objection, right, or being objective. It is good to be as unbiased and as objective as possible for most of the time. But like with anything, doing that just bar none 100% of the time is not conducive necessarily to having a fun experience. And that is the overall. That should always be the top priority of any D&D game, is to have fun, for as many people to have fun as possible. Not everybody. You can't, necessarily please everybody all the time. And that's okay. But as long as, most of your players are having a pretty dang good time, having a lot of fun, then we would probably count that as a win. And then for other players, you might have to talk and maybe like work out with them a little bit, like what they feel is missing or what could maybe help them have a better time. But overall, that's why I would always say no GM should ever be just 100% like, you know what? No matter what happens, I'm not going to intervene at all to manipulate events.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. If you have a player that spends the whole campaign trying to restore their lost church, all these churches have been destroyed, and they finally get all these temples up and running again to the god that they have prophesized and talked about and spread the word of this whole campaign. And at the end of it, you just kind of give them like a yay, you did it. Like, that's not. What is the point of putting in all that effort if at the end of it you don't even get anything for it?
The
reward shouldn't just be, I feel good about this. The reward should be acknowledgement. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, how much do I have to do to get acknowledgement? And I think that's where a lot of games fall a little bit short, is the fact that if I'm doing something actively for a being, or in the word of, or in semblance of this being, whether they are old and forgotten or still very much here, there should be some form, whether it's from a boon or a change in mechanic for the character or something that is, something that they can look at and see and understand and be like, this is a reward I got for doing what like this character wanted to do. And that's huge. I think that's,
it's a
even
big thing.
it doesn't even have to necessarily be super powerful, but like the reality is, if I spend all this time and now now you have this blessing, or like your form looks different, things like that aren't necessarily combat. If you're afraid of making your characters too
more
powerful,
aesthetic,
yeah, give them something aesthetic. That's
give
one of
them,
my favorite,
or give them something more social. Give them a social boon or something.
like that's one of my favorite, like one of me personally as a player in D&D, one of my favorite things to add to characters are not necessarily mechanical things. I like aesthetic choices. There is the warlock, what are they called? Invocation. What does it do? It makes it so you can't sleep, and your eyes are like, well, no, this is the one where you just don't sleep. Everything else is normal.
Gotcha.
What does it do to your character? It makes your eyes turn all black. You look like, it's like looking into a dark pond. That is something that, to me, the sleeping doesn't do anything. I still have to rest like everyone else. I can't, do whatever I want.
You can keep watch like that.
I can keep watch. Great. So who else can do that? Elves and Warforged.
Yep.
And there's a couple other ones that don't sleep normally now with all the added races. Okay, great. That's not really a mechanic.
It's not a huge difference.
All that much.
It's not a big thing.
The only thing I can really do is like read books. And you can't really do anything hard, like you can't do like hardcore research or anything like that.
No, you can't do any extraneous activity. It's got to be light.
You know what it does for the character? Every time an NPC or another player character looks at me, something looks wrong. I like that more than any other thing it gives me, because that's cool.
And that makes a
character
that comes into play again. That heavily is reliant on the GM addressing that and acknowledging that.
Yeah.
I like that too. Like I was gonna say, like another thing that would honestly just be amazing. And again, we could even use Critical Role as a reference point. After a certain amount of time with your characters doing all these different things in the world, they should start building up reputation. They should start building up a reputation around the world with people knowing, hey, I've heard of you guys. And they should start to treat them and interact with them based off of their feats, their choices, their disposition, their reputation. As well as potentially like, hey, for instance, in connection with the gods, if a god has interacted with them, blessed them, or shown favoritism or favor towards them, then why not have that god spread it to their clergy to let them know, hey, any followers of this god, if they recognize them, like, hey, my god, I received kind of a vision or whatever, or premonition about you from my god. We're going to help you out.
Yeah,
we're going to provide some support, like, because here's another thing, right? There are a lot of backgrounds that have a similar vibe where you're like, hey, you're going to go to a temple or whatever of this order that you're a part of, or you're going to, as a folk hero, people and other peasants are going to try and protect you should you need assistance and help. I feel like those aspects, same thing, are highly underused. Because the GM always seems to be in kind of a state or a mindset of like, I have to make this as difficult potentially as possible. To be fair, the players don't always let the GM know, because the GM is not responsible for remembering all of your own abilities. But GMs, if a player brings up their background, or even again, if this god has taken, and this god is again a benevolent, popular god, like we can even say, like we'll go with again Chantia. She is like probably the most well-known deity. And probably helpful, like, yeah, she's not super powerful in terms of combat, so she probably can't offer them that. But I'll be damned if she couldn't have like a number of just worshippers be like, hey, like, we're a farmer, like, you guys need some help, you need a place to stay, come over. We'll shack you up here. You guys can just chill out.
And especially
offer you some resources, maybe some healing potions, something.
Especially as your party gets more and more,
high
level, well known, and it's one of those things where it's not even necessarily like, oh, we're going to help you in this combat scenario. It can be as simple as like you travel halfway across the continent to a city you've never been before. You show up and there's the evil forces are already waiting for you and they attack you. And you win or you run or whatever whatever happened, you end up in a dire situation. You're running
your
through this,
resources are spent.
you're running through this city, and all of a sudden, as you're running down an alley, trapdoor on the side of the alley opens.
Yeah, someone beckons you.
You see a normal looking person who flashes out their hand to you, and you see a crest from something that one of your characters belongs to, or a symbol of one of the gods that you follow. And it's one of those things where it's like they know who you are, because instead of necessarily you being the only one that these gods communicate with, these beings communicate with, guess what? There's many people on this like in this plane. So you might not be the one that they're necessarily talking to, but someone else might get information about you, because now you're a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
You're important to something. So now all of a sudden you go from not having communication or not feeling welcome to all of a sudden now you have this haven of people that know who you are and what you need to do. And that's huge. And that doesn't even have to be a background decision. That's something that I think goes along great with Acolyte,
exactly,
or Sage, or Folk Hero as examples. But like,
Knight.
That's even Gladiator. But like that's one of those things where it's like that's a simple thing to do, and it's not game breaking, and
not
it's
at
not,
all. It's part of the game as a fact.
It's not even you making it so your characters have it too easy. No, it's giving them a chance, instead of having to find a place and hunker down and be afraid,
like an inn or whatever, the usual.
Which they did that.
They've
From
done
levels
that.
1 through 12,
Yeah.
they did that.
Ton.
They're level 16 now. Let them go to a place where people actually respect them.
Yeah. Again,
it feels
okay.
Nice.
It's okay to respect, to have characters, NPCs like your party. It's okay for them to be like, oh my God, like maybe some hero worship even for what they have done and accomplished. If they have saved lives, they've protected like a city, like there are going to be correspondence from that city to other cities of being like, hey, here's the current status of what happened. Like other cities should be aware of what transpired there. Hell, there will even just be bards. That's what bards are for. They travel throughout this place. They sing songs and tell tales of the things of what happens, of events that go on, especially if they're intense. And so it's okay to have that. Heck, you could even have, again, bards of a certain god, a certain deity. You can have cleric, like whatever. Like this is all about, again, like the crux, I guess, of this video, and we're on to both the gods as well as the other topic we kind of just touched upon, is about immersing your players in a world that is more alive and that doesn't always just feel like it's always against them.
Mm-hmm.
No, it doesn't always. Not everything has to be adversity, right?
Yeah.
Especially, and there are many ways and reasons and applications for you to provide support without it being just overtly, game breaking or whatever. Like,
because
and
that support makes the adversity more.
It makes it worth
more.
it. Yeah, it makes it worth it more to combat and to go up against this adversity. If it's like, hey, we acknowledge your efforts and this is the reward. It's not even necessarily, again, like a reward of just like money or weaponry or equipment. It's like that stuff's cool too, for sure. But it's also just showing that you are having an effect on the world, a positive effect on the world.
Or a negative one if that's what you're going for.
Or a negative one. Either way,
is support and adversity can come in either order. I think that's also something we forget. We always talk about like, oh, you get this reward once you finish your task. Well, that's not always the case, because tasks can't always be finished like that. No. But there's I think stops along the way where support can be offered not as a reward, but as a crutch to help get them there in a way that is fluid and organic to a story. It's one of those things, like there's so many instances in fantasy and sci-fi media where it's not always just you get good thing because you did good thing. No, it could be you tried to do good thing and you didn't do it very well. And now there are people who are still rooting for you and want it to happen because they know you can do it. You might not know.
Effort. They rewarded the fact you tried, and you're still gonna try. Again, one of the best examples I think of a lot of this is Critical Role. Like campaign 1, that was a phenomenal example, I would say, if not maybe the best, in my opinion, of like Vox Machina did a lot of stuff. And yeah, they saved the actual king or whatever. I forget of the city or whatever, but it's like,
I thought they only saved his family. I thought he died.
no, they saved him. He was alive, and then they like died during the attack of the Chroma Conclave or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, no, they saved him, and they already recognized for their contribution. And even before that, they had done like a number of things for like, like the resident wizard or whatever there. They had interacted. Like they were recognized even before that whole moment there and stuff, and provided with certain things. And then not just that, but afterwards, people knew about them. They had heard about them. They had begun to interact and respond to them and react to them accordingly because of what they had heard. And it's okay to have that positive aspect. Again, yes, not everything should be a constant struggle in the game. Some things should be easy, and that's okay. It doesn't always have to be like you walk into an establishment, especially, again, if you're not necessarily getting a lot of gold either. It's like, oh, hey, it shouldn't always be like, I have to haggle with this guy to maybe get a discount. Maybe this merchant is a fan of theirs. They walk in, he's like, oh my God, I've heard about you guys. You guys don't like, oh, I would love it if you could like utilize some of my items or equipment or whatever. Like, just tell your friends or the king or whoever about it. If you get a chance, like you get a discount, whatever. You know what I mean? Or like we could even say, if we want to go that route, sometimes like we'll even say a deity who is interacting, right? Wants them. A deity could absolutely just like be like, hey, I am granting you the blessing of wielding this particular weapon or equipment or whatever to help you on your journey, right?
Yeah.
You don't always have to just be waiting for for them to go shopping to pay for it, or for them to maybe, get a random weapon or item off of a fight or a combat encounter or something. Like it's okay to provide your characters, your players, with support from the world that they are trying, usually, not always, but usually, to protect and to save and to explore and live in, to prosper it. But yeah. Anything else that you kind of got, bud? I think
I think by the end there we both kind of coalesced our opinions.
Yeah,
pretty well.
I think that just about sums it up, acolytes.
Yeah,
In essence,
that's good.
Yeah, in essence, just within reason, always try to make your world as, again, that sweet spot of reality and fantasy, immersive, and as Sam has always said, acknowledgement is so nice for their efforts.
It's huge. I mean, it's one of those. It's the reason we play this game. As selfish as it sounds, a lot of D&D is about escapism, and I think positive things like that, whether it's affirmations or reward for genuine behavior, not necessarily good or bad behavior, but genuine. You put in a real effort to a story, you put in a real effort to a character, and interaction with something that is put in front of you. I think it deserves reciprocation,
some amount of acknowledgement and respect.
I will say this, as someone who's oftentimes looking for certain things, very specific things when I play this game, because I am a bit picky. Adam can attest to that. The reality is, I think, on one hand, where I'm saying DMs, you need to do better in this, I think as players, we also need to take what is given. It's not always going to go the way you want it to. It's not always going to be this picturesque dream that you want. But I think when it's something, and it's something palpable that you can understand and appreciate even a little, I think that speaks volumes way more than just nothing or just getting gold. Like, yeah, we all love gold. I love shopping. I love being able to throw money at problems in D&D.
Everyone loves stuff.
Why? Because guess what? I don't get to do that in real life. So I want to do it in a fake one.
Yeah.
But the reality is that sometimes that's not all you want. And sometimes it can be nice to still get that. But the reality is that there's a lot. I think there's levels to what you can get and what you're going to appreciate. And I advise players as well as DMs. This is something that's a reciprocated thing. If they give you something and you're just like, whatever, like, then they're not going to do it for you either. So even those little things that don't seem like much at the time, they might mean more later on. You know, the one dream you got at session 4, you may not think it means anything, but write it down. Pay attention. If it corresponds to something that happens in the game, no matter how minute you thought that detail was, that might mean the world to the person across that DM screen. That you listened to it, you paid attention, and connected the dots,
put it down,
and you care about it. Well, and guess what? Now that opens a whole nother avenue of things that they can do with you. And I think that's something too. I think there's a lot of DMs out there that might be afraid to put those things out there, because if they put all this time into thinking about this and then no one takes it, They don't care.
They just wasted all of their effort. Their effort was not acknowledged.
It's not even a wasted effort. I think it's a tinge of regret and like, why?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It was wasted, and that then leads to like regret, and then maybe even resentment.
Yeah,
like,
which you don't
because want. Again, their efforts were not acknowledged.
Yeah,
just like players' efforts should be acknowledged, so too should the efforts of the GM. Always,
you have to.
That's the point of this game. We're all taking this commitment,
collaborative,
putting this thing in. And our efforts should be mutually acknowledged by everyone. Like, that is what makes this so special. That's what makes this game feel so special.
Yeah.
Is that
feel real?
Yeah. And ironically, despite the fact that in reality, a lot of the time you don't get acknowledged for a lot of your effort. But this, ironically, is what can kind of make this fantasy feel almost more real, in that it's like, hey, this feels right.
Yeah.
This feels correct. And that then helps to feed, hopefully, your soul, your spirit, to bolster you in reality as well. Yeah. When you feel starving.
The same way it should be your character is the same way you should feel. I think it's one of those things that no matter how much of a fantasy it is, that's the reality is that we all come here, whether good things or bad things happen in a game, we all come here to have an overall positive feeling.
Yeah, and I think have an experience, a positive experience.
What we talked about, I think, can add a lot more of a chance for that to happen for a lot more people, which would be heartwarming for me personally if I got to see more of that.
Honestly,
as sappy as that comes off as.
No, that's beautiful, Sammy. Honestly, like on that note, again, like that's why we appreciate anybody who could like, comment, share, the channel, the video with people, let people know about it. If they don't, if you enjoy it, if you like kind of what we talk about and what we do here, because that is what it's about. It's about hopefully being able to spread a little bit more awareness and to help people have a higher chance of really enjoying life, through this game, and maybe also helping that. But as always, thank you guys.
Thank you
so much for watching, for tuning in. Please do leave, again, comment down below about maybe some cool ways that maybe your GM has utilized deities, gods in your campaign in a really cool way, has shown acknowledgement and responded.
Or any ways that you want to try to do that.
Any ways that you'd like to do that. Yeah, some ideas, some ways that you have maybe as a GM or a player. Either way. We love and appreciate you guys. Yeah, we really would. Have a great rest of your day, y'all. We'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much.